being able to, take this and turn it into a positive is really possible. And
this is the moment I lost it, where Madison Keys broke down after reaching the semifinals again and not getting through. It's a story we don't often tell in sports for the pain of it. It's when an athlete cannot get over a hill. And in this case, the hill is a Grand Slam in tennis, the most difficult accomplishment in the world of tennis. So, the hill is more of a mountain. In the world of sports, we are constantly looking for the GOATs. That's the greatest of all time to the casual fan. It's an obsession of all fans, whether we know it or not. We are on the hunt to be able to watch the best player. So at the end of our lives, when we're talking about the moments of that player, we can say that we were alive to witness their greatness. Whether that is LeBron James, who in his second year made it to the NBA championship but lost to my favorite team, the Spurs, and who a championship eluded him for the first few years of his career. But when he finally got one, he was cemented into sports lore as one of the greatest of all time. And then he won another one, and another, and another, and another. The tagline for LeBron for a number of years was, "We are all witnesses." We all had the privilege, nay, the honor, of watching this man perform day in and day out. We were witnesses of his greatness. This happens with a lot of other athletes as well. Whether that's been the constant debate in soccer between Messi and Ronaldo, Messi being the clear winner in that conversation, by the way, or seeing the greatness of Michael Phelps or Katie Ledecky or Sidney McLaughlin, or any of these athletes that we get to watch beat records. It gives us the honor to say that we were witnesses. This is what we were all able to witness in the tennis world in recent years, with what we call the golden age of tennis. It is absolutely mind-blowing to me that in the men's tennis world, we had the third highest Grand Slam winner of all time live and play in our lifetime. And the second, and the first. This era of men's tennis will never be topped. And I get to tell my kids and my grandkids about this era, being that stingy and grumpy old man that thinks his generation is the greatest and no other generation is better. And for this generation of men's tennis, even the pro players say there will be no comparison. We also got to witness the world of Serena Williams, maybe one of the greatest athletes of all time, perhaps one of the greatest sports stories of all time. Lived in the projects, her sister was murdered, and she just practiced and worked her way up to the top, hit adversity after adversity, and finally won her first Grand Slam after Grand Slam after Grand Slam, and dominated the tennis scene for decades. These are the sports stories that we crave. But something just happened in the tennis world that caught my attention and showed me the power of a story of disappointment and perseverance. Yes, Serena persevered through hell, but she had won a Grand Slam early in her career. The pressure was off a bit. The same is true for Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. All these greats won something early, and their battle was to become the greatest of all time. But recently, I've been more attracted to stories where a person just wants to hit that first Grand Slam. And to be honest, it makes me sad for a lot of amazing players during the era of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, because only one brilliant and huge player named Juan Del Potro was able to steal one Grand Slam away from those three in about a decade of tennis. That is insane. My heart goes out to players like Andy Roddick, the American who only won one in his entire career early in 2003, and then never won again because he played during that era. This interview always kills me. Roddick was intense, but always a good sport. Andy Murray was the same. He had to play during the golden era of men's tennis, and if he played a few years earlier or during today's era, probably would have won double-digit Grand Slams.
Right, I'm going to try this, and it's not going to be easy.
And his emotion after becoming the runner-up in his home tournament of Wimbledon, again to Federer, and how much he tears up and isn't able to finish sentences because you just know how close he is absolutely gutting to me. While writing this, I cried watching this speech. Murray was so good, and it was so unfortunate that a Grand Slam evaded him for so long. Until he finally won. If I felt relief, I cannot imagine what Murray felt in this moment. And recently it happened again. But before we talk about that moment, I want to show you the story because it's one for the ages, and it all starts here.
Positive is really possible. And
That moment. Right there is the most devastating feeling in all of sports. To be so close and to not win. Madison Keys in that moment knows how much she has given to this sport. It's in the practice sessions every day. It's in the traveling and the Grand Slam result after Grand Slam result after Grand Slam result of never anything going in your favor. But Madison Keys' story starts a bit earlier. I remember the first time she popped up on my radar. It was 2015. I lived in Dallas at the time and was obsessed with tennis. I was never a great player, but who doesn't want to watch and witness the golden era of both men's and women's tennis? The Aussie Open was up early in the year. It's when the tennis starts for me. It kicks off. And all of a sudden, this unseeded 17-year-old kid named Madison Keys started winning. A lot. She had crushed everyone she played and was starting to garner the attention of the tennis world. Not exactly for her play so much as who she was set to play in the quarterfinal. Most old school tennis fans were excited for the quarterfinal because a certain famous sister duo was slotted into the same side of the bracket, and if they both won their quarterfinal matches, they were ready to play each other. Something every tennis fan wanted. But for me, watching Keys in the beginning of this tournament, I was thrilled for the potential matchup that was looming, because Madison Keys had the opportunity to beat not only Venus Williams, but to face off against Serena in the semifinals, where someone in the prime of their career was playing someone who certainly had a break career. And Madison Keys felt like the future. I was excited to see her attempt to prevail against two of the greatest players of all time. And it was a good story because Madison Keys actually took up tennis because she liked Venus Williams so much. Because perhaps at this moment too, we were going to be able to witness firsthand the emergence of the GOAT after Serena. It was my hope. And she did it. She beat Venus Williams in the quarters. It was a thrilling game. Back and forth, and finally Madison found an edge in the third set and ran away with it. And her reward for beating Venus was to play her bigger, better, stronger, faster, and more accomplished younger sister, Serena. I woke up for this match. I remember it pretty clear, actually. I was so excited, and Madison fought hard. The first set, I was the most excited I've been during a tennis match. But Madison lost the first set. And to a young mind, it's very difficult to come back from such a devastating first set loss to such a huge opponent and win the next two games against the greatest tennis player of all time. I was happy Serena was able to win that Grand Slam, but devastated that Madison didn't get to win that one either. Yet, I was also excited and ready to watch the career of Madison. I knew it was going to be a successful one because she was a fighter. And oh, did she prove me right. Not in the way a lot of people think, but success did not come quickly for Madison. In 2016, she reached the rank of 7, but lost every Grand Slam in the 4th round. It's an accomplishment, but it also hurts to lose in the middle of a tournament. In 2017, she decided to finally have surgery on her wrist that was hurting her since 2015. Before that, she elected to not have the surgery so she could attempt to qualify for the 2016 WTA finals, which she did and was an amazing accomplishment. Because of her injury, she didn't play in the next Grand Slam, and a lot of other tournaments in between, and she fell out of the top 20. She was eliminated from the French and the Wimbledon in the 2nd round that year. But surprise was around the corner, in the final Grand Slam of the season. It's September. It's the Grand Slam I love the most because it's in my backyard. The US Open in Flushing Meadows, New York. Americans love it, and it marks the perfect end to the summer and the beginning of fall. And this year, Madison clawed her way back to the 15th rank in the world. This is American grit. This is the grit of a champion. And this Grand Slam was one I will never forget, because Madison lost. Again. But before she lost, she beat number 17 Vesnina, number 4 Svitolina, and an unranked dangerous looking player in Kanepi, who, if you know tennis, you know to fear some unranked players later in the tournament because they play as if they have nothing to lose. She beat her though, which set up the most American semifinal the world has ever seen. 4 Americans beat their opponents to meet in the semifinal. Venus Williams, Sloane Stephens, Coco Vandeweghe, and my favorite player, Madison Keys. Madison beat Coco easily that game, and was set up to play Sloane Stephens in the finals. Americans everywhere were set. One of these 2 players were going to win their first Grand Slam. It was a win-win. But not for me. I watched in agony as Sloane Stephens beat Madison, because at this time I was a full-blown Madison Keys fan. She had the adversity, she had the balance game, she had the charm, and she proved herself as a fighter. Every tournament I was rooting for Madison as she played, but was particularly devastated when she lost this one. But she lost with grace. Something that you can do early on in your career, and something that's kind of easy at that point because you just know you have time. But to do it later in your career can take a toll on you. And it did for Madison. She didn't have the Grand Slam success that everyone looks for. Although 2018 was arguably her most successful year, reaching the quarterfinals in the Australian Open and the semifinals in the French and the US Open, she struggled from 2019 to the middle of 2023, only reaching the semifinal once in the 2022 Australian Open. She battled through injuries during those years and lots of disappointments, even falling outside the top 50, which sometimes for a tennis star means you might not ever make it back inside the top 50. Some felt that Madison's story was coming to a close, that she was a bright young tennis star who could never find Grand Slam success and was slowly fading and falling in rank and growing more and more frustrated as time went on. But she had class. Perhaps the most class on the court that I've seen from a tennis star since the class act of Roger Federer. Whether she won or lost, she always treated her opponent with respect. She had class in droves, and I love that about her. But what I loved more was her grit and determination. You could tell how much she wanted it. And this leads up to this tear-filled interview, when she reached another Grand Slam semifinal at the US Open, only to
really
lose
possible.
and face more disappointment. And as a fan of Madison from the beginning, it crushed me to see this scene. Her devastation. Just she's trying to show class, but she is overwhelmed with yet another disappointment. It was reminiscent of Murray's frustration of having never really won a Grand Slam and getting so close every time, but with no success. Madison's story started to become heartbreaking to me because I started to wonder if she would ever win. And I wanted it. I wanted it for her because someone who gets this close every single time without winning makes for a great story, but it also takes a toll on athletes in a way that most of us cannot imagine. One of my favorite stories of this is Gary Robbins running the Barclay Marathons and never completing it. Having been the only runner most people know about in that race, and the only reason that people would tune in to watch that every single year, he actually ended up dropping out of the race entirely, not wanting the pressure on him anymore and just wanting to bury that race and be done with it. That takes maturity. And seeing Gary's story, I was curious if that was going to be Madison's story as well. That she would just be known as one of those class athletes who never won a Grand Slam, but competed and fought and lost with class every single time. I didn't hate a story like that, but it's kind of a sad one. And in 2025, as the tennis year had only just started, the Australian Open began. I hadn't watched a match of the Australian Open in the last decade, to be honest. It's a tough time to watch as an American, and the fans there, as well as the media, have just been a little testy over the last few years. But I opened ESPN every morning to see the scores, and Madison was doing good. I started paying attention when she beat fellow American and number 10 in the world, Danielle Collins. And then she beat number 6 in the world, Elena Rybakina. Then number 28, Elena Svitolina. She was in the semifinals again. And the curse of the semifinals, I'm sure, loomed for Madison Keys. At this point in a person's career, it can become a mental block whenever you don't win. It kind of becomes ingrained in your mind that you're the player who reaches the semifinals but never progresses any further. It becomes an issue of confidence. And I don't know, but if I were her, my confidence would waver for her next opponent. Arguably the best tennis player of the past 5 years and current world number 2, Iga Swiatek. This game was insane. Iga won the first set, barely. It was reminiscent of the first semifinal that Madison played in against Serena. It was close, and Serena came out on top in that set, and then cruised to an easy win because her opponent was young and perhaps didn't have the mental fortitude. But this Madison was different. She was a different animal. She barely lost the first set 7-5, but something happened to Madison in that moment. She seemed to harden herself. And as I watched the game, I couldn't sense any fear in her eyes. It was all confidence. She knew she could do it. She believed in herself. And that was the moment I knew she was going to win this match. She hadn't deflated, but rather just seemed to get ready to fight. And fight she did. She dominated the next set, winning 6-1. And on her way to the last set, it was an insanely close game that went to tiebreak. Madison won 10-8, thus winning the set 7-6. She was in the final. Again. But it was no cruising into the final either. The very opponent who made her do this in the post-match interview 2 years ago was the very opponent she was slotted to play in the final. World number 1, Aryna Sabalenka. Madison won the first set. Things were looking good. She lost the second, and the nerves settled in, and then fought hard, and never gave up, and battled through every single point. And she eked out the third. Madison Keys became a Grand Slam champion. And to be honest, I started to cry before she started to cry. I felt so proud of her. Proud that this woman persevered through such adversity in her career, in a career marked with such highs and lows and such big up and downs. She is now forever a champion. But before she won a Grand Slam, she was still a winner. Not for her stats, but for her attitude on the court and her perseverance and endurance. Often in sports, we look for those athletes that win championship after championship. Athletes that just win. But there's another breed of athletes out there that I'm starting to become more interested in. It's the athletes where a championship eludes them. And they have to wake up every day with the feeling that they haven't won. The pressure of the world still weighing on them. That when sports radio talks, they talk about how they are not great players because they haven't won when it mattered. It's these athletes who show up day after day after day to put the work in. Sometimes we never see those athletes win a championship. But there are times that we do. And this past weekend, with Madison Keys winning a Grand Slam, I am thrilled to be able to witness this greatness. And I am proud of Madison Keys. You are a Grand Slam champion. And I am honored to have seen it in my lifetime.